The autumn rain pelted against the windows of Clarence's house as Charles sat in his study, staring at the photographs scattered across his mahogany desk. Each image told a story of duty, sacrifice, and choices that had shaped his life for over 7 decades. The golden light from his desk lamp cast long shadows across the room, making the portraits of his ancestors seem to watch him with knowing eyes. In one corner of the desk lay a photograph from his wedding day with Diana, her radiant smile captured forever in time. Beside it, a more recent image showed him and Camilla at a state dinner, both wearing the practiced smiles of people who had learned to navigate the treacherous waters of public life. But it was the third photograph that held his attention now, a candid shot of Kate laughing with his grandchildren during a family gathering at Balmoral. The phone call had come 3 hours earlier. Dr. Matthews, Camilla's physician, had delivered the news with the clinical detachment that medical professionals use when reality becomes too heavy for emotion. The words echoed in Charles's mind: advanced stage, aggressive progression, limited time. The Queen Consort, the woman who had stood by his side through decades of controversy and criticism, was facing her greatest battle. Charles removed his reading glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. At 75, he had assumed the throne later in life than any of his predecessors, carrying with him the weight of expectations that had been building for decades. The monarchy had weathered many storms during his mother's reign, but now, as king, every decision felt magnified, every choice scrutinized by a world that seemed increasingly skeptical of royal relevance. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had waited his entire life to become king, and now, when he should be focused on his reign, personal crisis threatened to overshadow his royal duties. The British public had only recently begun to accept Camilla fully, their forgiveness coming slowly after years of seeing her dedication to charitable causes and her unwavering support of Charles. To lose her now, when the monarchy needed stability more than ever, seemed like a cruel twist of fate. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. William entered without waiting for permission, a privilege of both his position as heir and his role as a son trying to support his father through an impossible situation. "Papa," William said, using the childhood name that still occasionally slipped out during private moments. "I've just spoken with the palace press office. They're asking about tomorrow's engagements." Charles looked up at his eldest son, seeing Diana's compassionate eyes reflected in William's concerned expression. "What did you tell them?" "That we're reviewing the schedule," William replied, settling into the leather chair across from his father's desk. "But they need an answer soon. The children's hospital visit is particularly important to Camilla. She's been planning it for months." The mention of Camilla's charitable work brought a slight smile to Charles's face. Even now, facing her own mortality, she had been asking about her commitments, worried about disappointing the organizations that depended on royal patronage. It was this selfless dedication that had gradually won over the British people, transforming her from the woman they blamed for Diana's unhappiness into a respected working royal. "She insists on going," Charles said, picking up a letter from the hospital's chief executive expressing gratitude for the planned visit. "The doctors say she has good days and bad days. Yesterday was good." William leaned forward, his expression serious. "And what about you? How are you holding up?" It was a question Charles hadn't expected, though he should have. His sons had learned hard lessons about the importance of emotional honesty after their mother's death. They had grown up in the public eye, but they had also grown up understanding that beneath the titles and the protocol, they were still a family dealing with loss, love, and the complicated dynamics that exist in every household. "I find myself thinking about time," Charles admitted, his voice carrying the weight of reflection. "How much of it we waste on things that don't matter, how little we have for the things that do. Your mother understood that. Diana, I mean. She knew how to make every moment count." The mention of Diana hung in the air between them. It wasn't that they couldn't speak of her, quite the opposite. But, in moments like this, her absence felt particularly acute. Diana would have known exactly what to do, how to balance public duty with private crisis, how to find hope in the darkest circumstances. "Kate asked me to give you this," William said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "She wrote it after we told her about Camilla's diagnosis." Charles opened the letter with careful hands. Kate's handwriting was elegant, but unpretentious, much like the woman herself. Her words were simple but profound, offering not just sympathy but understanding. She wrote about loss, about the fear of watching someone you love face mortality, about the strength that comes from unexpected places. She mentioned her own mother's illness years earlier, how it had taught her that love sometimes means letting go while still holding on. She has a way with words, Charles said, folding the letter carefully. And with people. She understands what this family needs in ways that continue to surprise me. She wants to help, William said. With whatever you need. The children adore Camilla, and Catherine thinks they should spend time with her while they can. She believes in making memories, not avoiding difficult conversations. Charles nodded, appreciating his daughter-in-law's wisdom. Kate had joined the royal family as an outsider, much like Diana had, but she had navigated the challenges with a quiet strength that reminded him of his mother. She had learned to balance her role as a future queen with her identity as a mother and wife, never losing sight of what truly mattered. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, creating a cocoon of intimacy in the study. Father and son sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about duty, love, and the fragile nature of human relationships. Charles found himself thinking about the choices he had made throughout his life, the people he had hurt, and the love he had eventually found with Camilla. Their relationship had begun in scandal and had been forged in the fires of public scrutiny. They had weathered decades of criticism, protocol disputes, and the constant comparison to Diana's memory. But, through it all, Camilla had remained steadfast, transforming herself from a private person thrust into public life into a working royal who genuinely cared about her duties and the causes she supported. I need to go to her, Charles said finally, standing from his desk. She's been trying to spare me from worry, pretending she's stronger than she feels. But I can see it in her eyes. William stood as well, placing a supportive hand on his father's shoulder. What about the constitutional questions? If her condition worsens, there will be decisions to make about her role, about state functions. It was a delicate topic, but one that couldn't be ignored. The queen consort played an important role in state ceremonies and royal functions. If she became unable to fulfill her duties, arrangements would need to be made. The machinery of monarchy continued regardless of personal circumstances, a lesson Charles had learned watching his mother navigate her own health challenges in her final years. Let's take it one day at a time, Charles replied. The Constitution has survived worse challenges than this. What matters now is being present for the time we have. As William prepared to leave, Charles called him back. Would you ask Kate if she might join us for dinner tomorrow? Camilla has been asking for her. She says Kate brings light into any room she enters. She'll be there, William promised. And Papa? You don't have to carry this alone. We're family. After William left, Charles returned to his desk and the scattered photographs. He picked up the image of Kate with the children, studying her genuine smile and the way she seemed completely at ease with her role in their lives. She had brought stability to William in ways that had allowed him to flourish as both a husband and a future king. More than that, she had brought joy back to a family that had known too much sorrow. The telephone rang, jarring him from his reverie. It was Camilla's private secretary, calling to discuss the next day's schedule. Even in her illness, Camilla was insisting on maintaining as many commitments as possible. She refused to disappoint the organizations that counted on her support, particularly those focused on literacy and women's issues that had become her passion projects. Tell her we'll make it work, Charles said. Whatever she needs, we'll make it work. As he ended the call, Charles felt a sense of determination settling over him. The coming weeks would be difficult, filled with impossible choices and public scrutiny. But he had learned something important from his years of waiting to become king, from his decades of public service, and from the love he had found with Camilla. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not in public, but in the quiet moments between heartbeats, in the choice to keep loving even when love becomes painful. The rain had stopped, and through his window, Charles could see the first stars appearing in the clearing sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, he would focus on what mattered most, being present for the woman who had chosen to share her life with his complicated legacy, and preparing for whatever came next with the support of a family that had learned to find strength in unity. The morning light streamed through the ornate windows of the king's private sitting room at Buckingham Palace, casting geometric patterns across the Persian carpet. Charles sat across from Camilla, watching her methodically sort through correspondence that had arrived from various charities and organizations. Even in her weakened state, she insisted on personally reviewing every letter, every invitation, every request for royal patronage. The Children's Literacy Foundation in Manchester has asked if I might visit their new reading center, Camilla said, her voice carrying less strength than usual, but losing none of its determination. They've named it after me, Charles. How can I possibly decline? Charles studied his wife's face, noting the subtle changes that had become more pronounced over the past few weeks. The treatments were taking their toll, but her spirit remained undiminished. She had always possessed an inner strength that complemented his own struggles with duty and destiny, and even now, facing the greatest challenge of her life, she refused to retreat from her responsibilities. Perhaps we could arrange a video message, Charles suggested gently. The children would be thrilled to hear from you directly. Camilla's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. I won't become an invalid before I absolutely must. These organizations depend on royal visits to raise funds and awareness. A video message, however well-intentioned, doesn't have the same impact as showing up. It was an ongoing tension between them. Charles wanted to protect her, to shield her from the exhaustion that came with public engagements. But Camilla had spent years establishing her own identity within the royal framework, building relationships with causes that genuinely mattered to her. She wasn't willing to abandon that work simply because her body was failing her. The door opened quietly, and Kate appeared with a tea service. She had offered to join them for their morning routine, understanding instinctively that sometimes the most meaningful support came through simple presence rather than grand gestures. I brought your favorite biscuits, Kate said to Camilla, setting down a plate of homemade shortbread. George helped me make them yesterday. He was very serious about getting the measurements exactly right. Camilla's face lit up at the mention of Charles's grandson. That boy has the makings of a proper baker. Last time he visited, he insisted on teaching me his recipe for chocolate chip cookies. I suspect he got it from you. Kate settled into her chair with natural grace, pouring tea for each of them with the practiced ease of someone who had learned that protocol mattered less than comfort in private family moments. Charles watched the interaction between the two women, marveling at how Kate had seamlessly integrated herself into their family dynamic. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, Kate addressed Camilla directly, about making sure the children understand what's happening without frightening them. I wondered if you might like to help me plant a garden with them, something they could tend and remember you by. It was a perfect suggestion, Charles realized. Kate had an innate understanding of how to create meaningful memories while acknowledging difficult realities. She had learned this skill partly through her own family experiences and partly through watching how William had processed his mother's death. She knew that children needed concrete ways to express love and maintain connections. A memory garden, Camilla said thoughtfully. I love that idea. Perhaps we could include herbs for cooking? Louis is fascinated by the kitchen gardens at Sandringham. And Charlotte wants to learn about flower arranging, Kate added. She's been asking about your work with floral preservation techniques. Charles listened to their conversation, feeling a bittersweet mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Kate had become the bridge between past and future, helping to heal wounds while building new traditions. She represented continuity in a way that honored both Diana's memory and Camilla's contributions to their family. The tranquil moment was interrupted by Charles's private secretary, who appeared in the doorway with obvious reluctance. Your Majesty, I'm afraid there's been a development. The palace press office has received inquiries from several media outlets. Someone has leaked information about the Queen Consort's medical situation. Charles felt his jaw tighten. They had managed to keep Camilla's diagnosis private for nearly 2 months, allowing them to process the news as a family before facing public scrutiny. He should have known it wouldn't last. In the age of social media and relentless royal coverage, privacy was an increasingly rare commodity. How much do they know? Camilla asked, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Details about the hospital visits, the specialist consultations. They're asking for official confirmation and statements about future engagements. Kate reached across the space between their chairs and placed her hand gently over Camilla's. It was a simple gesture, but Charles noticed how his wife's shoulders relaxed slightly at the touch. Kate had a remarkable ability to convey strength and support through the smallest actions. We knew this day would come, Camilla said quietly. Perhaps it's better this way. I'm tired of pretending everything is normal when it isn't. Charles stood and walked to the window, looking out over the palace gardens where tourists were already gathering for the changing of the guard. In a few hours, the news would break, and their private struggle would become public property. Every appearance, every statement, every expression would be analyzed and interpreted by people who had never met them but felt entitled to opinions about their lives. The question is how we control the narrative, Charles said, turning back to face them. We can let them speculate and create their own story, or we can tell our truth. Kate spoke up quietly. What if we approach this differently? Instead of just announcing the diagnosis, what if we showed them who Camilla really is? Her work, her dedication, her humanity. Charles raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? A documentary, perhaps, or a series of interviews. Not about the illness, but about her life, her causes, her vision for the future of the monarchy. Let people see the woman behind the title, the person who has devoted herself to service despite everything she's endured. It was a bold suggestion, and one that would require careful consideration. Royal communications had traditionally been formal and controlled, revealing little about the personal lives of family members. But Kate's generation understood media differently, recognizing that authenticity often resonated more powerfully than carefully crafted press statements. The palace communications team would have concerns. Charles's secretary interjected carefully. There are protocols about discussing medical matters, constitutional implications to consider. The Constitution will survive honesty, Camilla said with a slight smile. And I'm tired of protocols that protect institutions at the expense of human connection. If we're going to face this publicly, let's do it with dignity and truth. Charles returned to his chair, considering the implications of Kate's suggestion. Throughout his life, he had struggled with the balance between public duty and private authenticity. He had watched his sons learn to navigate media attention with greater skill than he had possessed at their age, partly because they had learned from his mistakes, and partly because they had different relationships with public expectations. There's something else to consider, Kate said carefully. The children. They'll hear about this at school, see it on television. We need to prepare them not just for losing someone they love, but for sharing that loss with the entire world. It was a sobering thought. Charles's grandchildren had grown up with some understanding of their unique position, but they were still just children trying to make sense of adult complexities. George, at 11, was beginning to understand the weight of his eventual destiny, but Charlotte and Louis were still young enough to believe that love and family were private matters. What would Diana have done? Camilla asked suddenly, surprising everyone in the room. The question hung in the air for a moment. It wasn't the first time Camilla had referenced Diana, but it never failed to create a complex emotional response. The two women had never had the opportunity to know each other as people rather than as symbols in a public drama, but Camilla had spent years studying Diana's approach to royal duties and public communication. She would have found a way to turn the attention towards something positive, Kate answered thoughtfully. She was brilliant at taking personal struggles and using them to highlight causes that mattered to her. Remember how she used her own eating disorder to bring attention to mental health issues? Charles nodded slowly. Diana had possessed an intuitive understanding of how to transform personal vulnerability into public service. She had broken royal protocol repeatedly, but always in service of connecting with people who needed to know they weren't alone in their struggles. The literacy programs, Camilla said suddenly, her eyes brightening with an idea. What if we use this opportunity to highlight the importance of reading, especially for children facing difficult circumstances? Show how books can provide comfort and escape when reality becomes overwhelming. Kate leaned forward, clearly inspired by the direction of the conversation. We could visit some of the libraries and schools you've supported over the years. Let people see the impact of your work while you're still able to do it. Charles felt a surge of pride watching the two women collaborate. They represented different generations and different approaches to royal duty, but they shared a fundamental understanding of service and compassion. Kate had learned from both Diana's innovations and Camilla's steady dedication, creating her own synthesis of royal responsibility and personal authenticity. There's one more thing, Charles said, his voice heavy with emotion he rarely allowed himself to express. I need to tell you both something I should have said years ago. Both women looked at him with surprise. Charles had never been comfortable with emotional declarations, preferring to show his feelings through actions rather than words. But recent events had reminded him that time was precious, and words left unspoken could become regrets that lasted forever. Camilla, you saved my life in ways that go beyond love or companionship. You helped me become the man I needed to be, the king I'm still trying to become. And, Kate, you've given this family hope for the future while honoring its past. You've shown us how to evolve without losing our essence. Camilla reached for his hand, her grip still strong despite everything else that was weakening. We've all saved each other, Charles. That's what families do. Kate wiped away a tear she hadn't realized was falling. We'll get through this together. All of us. And when people look back at this time, they'll see not just loss, but love. Not just endings, but new beginnings. Outside, the palace guards were beginning their ceremonial duties, carrying on traditions that had persisted through wars, scandals, and personal tragedies. Inside, three people who had learned to navigate the impossible balance between public duty and private emotion were preparing to face their greatest challenge yet, saying goodbye while the entire world watched, finding strength in vulnerability, and proving that even crowns cannot protect against the fundamental experiences that make us human. The autumn air at Windsor Castle carried a crispness that made everything feel more vivid, more immediate. Charles stood in the oak-paneled library, surrounded by books that had witnessed centuries of royal history, trying to process the conversation he had just finished with Camilla's medical team. The words echoed in his mind with devastating clarity, weeks, not months. Behind him, he could hear the gentle murmur of voices from the drawing room where Kate was reading to Charlotte and Louis, her voice bringing characters to life with the skill of someone who understood the power of storytelling. Camilla sat nearby, her hands busy with the needlework that had become both comfort and distraction during her treatment. To any observer, it would have seemed like an ordinary family evening, but Charles knew they were creating memories that would have to sustain them through the difficult days ahead. The sound of footsteps in the corridor announced William's arrival. He appeared in the doorway still wearing his formal military uniform, having come directly from a ceremony at Sandhurst where he had been presenting awards to young officers beginning their careers. The contrast was stark, his public role as future king set against the private crisis unfolding within their family walls. "How is she?" William asked quietly, joining his father at the window that overlooked the castle's east terrace. "Brave," Charles replied, his voice heavy with admiration and sorrow. "Impossibly brave. She spent this afternoon writing letters to all the organizations she patronizes, explaining that she may need to step back from active duties but encouraging them to continue their work. She's more concerned about disappointing others than she is about herself." William nodded, understanding the weight of duty that continued to drive his stepmother even as her strength ebbed. He had learned from both his parents that royal responsibility often meant putting others' needs before your own comfort. But watching Camilla navigate her illness with such grace had given him new appreciation for the sacrifices that came with their positions. "Kate thinks we should have the conversation with George tonight," William said carefully. "He's been asking questions about why Grandpa Camilla looks so tired lately. She's right. He's old enough to understand, and waiting will only make it harder." Charles felt his chest tighten at the thought of explaining mortality to his eldest grandson. George was at that complicated age where he was beginning to grasp the significance of his future role while still being young enough to believe that love could conquer any obstacle. How do you tell a child that some battles cannot be won through determination and hope? What does Kate suggest we tell him? The truth, but gently. That sometimes people we love get sick in ways that doctors cannot fix, but that doesn't mean we stop loving them or that they stop being important to us. She has a gift for explaining difficult things in ways that children can process. Through the window, Charles could see the ancient oak trees that had stood on these grounds for centuries, their branches now bare against the darkening sky. Each tree had witnessed countless royal dramas, personal triumphs, and private sorrows. The monarchy had survived because it understood that individual lives were temporary while institutions endured, but that knowledge provided little comfort when facing the loss of someone irreplaceable. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Kate appeared in the doorway with a tea service, her movements careful and deliberate in the way she had learned to navigate royal protocols while maintaining her natural warmth. "Camilla asked if you might join us," she said to Charles. "She wants to talk with all of us together while she's feeling strong." They made their way to the drawing room where Camilla sat surrounded by the children, Charlotte curled against her side, while Louis played quietly with toy soldiers on the carpet nearby. George sat in a nearby chair, his serious expression suggesting he sensed the gravity of whatever conversation was about to unfold. "Come sit with me," Camilla said to Charles, patting the sofa beside her. Her voice carried less strength than usual, but her eyes remained clear and determined. "I've been thinking about what we discussed earlier, about honesty and family." Kate settled into her chair with practiced grace, while William remained standing near the fireplace, his formal posture softening as he transitioned from public duties to family responsibilities. The room felt both intimate and significant, as if everyone present understood they were participating in a moment that would be remembered and treasured. "George," Camilla began, addressing the oldest grandchild directly, "your grandfather, and I want to tell you something important." I've been sick for a while now, sicker than we initially let you know. The doctors are doing everything they can, but sometimes our bodies cannot be fixed, no matter how much we want them to be. George's expression grew more serious, his young face processing information that would challenge his understanding of fairness and permanence. Are you going to die, Grandpa Camilla? The directness of the question hung in the air, demanding an equally honest response. Camilla reached for George's hand, her touch gentle but steady. I might, sweetheart. We don't know exactly when or how, but we know that my time might be shorter than we hoped. That's why we want to make sure we spend it talking about important things and making happy memories. Charlotte looked up from her position against Camilla's side, her young face confused but trusting. But if you die, how will we remember you? Kate leaned forward, her voice soft but confident. We remember people we love in many ways, Charlotte. Through stories about them, through photographs, through the things they taught us, and through continuing the work that mattered to them. Like the gardens? Louis asked from his position on the floor. You taught me about flowers. Camilla smiled, her expression brightening at the memory of their recent gardening sessions. Exactly like the gardens, Louis. Every time you plant something beautiful, every time you read a book, every time you help someone who needs it, you're keeping part of me alive. Charles watched this exchange with a mixture of heartbreak and profound respect for the woman he had married. Even in discussing her own mortality, Camilla was teaching his grandchildren about legacy, about the ways love transcends physical presence. She had learned this skill partly through her own experiences with loss, and partly through years of observing how the monarchy itself survived through transitions and transformations. Will Grandpa Charles be very sad? George asked, his question revealing a mature understanding of the connections between the adults in his life. Yes, Charles answered honestly, his voice thick with emotion he rarely allowed himself to display. I will be very sad. Grandpa Camilla has been my partner and my friend for many years. But being sad doesn't mean we can't also be grateful for the time we've had together. William stepped forward, kneeling beside his son's chair. Sometimes the people we love have to go away, but that doesn't mean the love goes away. Love stays with us forever, even when we cannot see the person anymore. It was a lesson William had learned through his own devastating loss, wisdom earned through years of processing his mother's death. He had discovered that grief and gratitude could coexist, that missing someone didn't diminish the joy of having known them. Can we still visit you if you go to the hospital? Charlotte asked, her practical nature asserting itself even in emotional moments. Of course, Camilla replied. And when I can't have visitors, we can talk on video calls. Technology makes it possible to stay connected even when we're not in the same room. Kate had been quiet during much of this conversation, but now she spoke with the authority of someone who understood both royal protocols and family dynamics. We're going to make sure that everyone knows how much Grandpa Camilla loves them, and we're going to find special ways to honor her memory when the time comes. What kind of special ways? George asked, his curiosity overcoming his initial sadness. Well, Camilla said, her eyes brightening with an idea. I've been thinking about creating a scholarship program for children who love to read but don't have access to lots of books. Maybe you could help me design it. The suggestion transformed the conversation from one focused on loss to one exploring possibilities. George straightened in his chair, clearly intrigued by the idea of contributing to something meaningful. Charlotte asked if they could include art books in the program, while Louis wanted to know if the scholarship could help children learn about gardens too. Charles watched his family adapt to heartbreaking news with remarkable resilience, finding ways to channel grief into purpose. It reminded him of the monarchy's own ability to reinvent itself during times of crisis, to find new relevance while honoring ancient traditions. There's something else, Camilla said, her voice carrying a weight that commanded attention. I want you all to know that being part of this family has been the greatest privilege of my life. Not because of the titles or the palaces, but because of the love and acceptance you've shown me. She looked directly at Kate as she continued. Catherine, you've brought such joy and stability to our family. You've shown us how to balance duty with authenticity, how to honor the past while embracing the future. I need you to know how grateful I am for your friendship and your example. Kate's eyes filled with tears she tried unsuccessfully to control. You've taught me so much about service and resilience, about finding purpose in responsibility and joy in small moments. And you, Camilla turned to Charles, you gave me a love I never expected to find. You showed me that it's possible to build happiness on a foundation of shared commitment and mutual respect. Charles reached for her hand, finding it still warm and strong despite everything else that was failing. You saved me from cynicism and regret. You showed me that it's never too late to choose love over duty, connection over isolation. The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fireplace and the distant sounds of evening settling over the castle grounds. Outside, the security lights illuminated the pathways where kings and queens had walked for nearly 1,000 years, each generation facing their own challenges and discoveries. Will you tell people about tonight? George asked suddenly. About what we talked about. Some of it, William replied carefully. People care about our family, and they deserve to understand what we're going through. But some conversations are just for us. Camilla nodded approvingly. We'll share what might help others who are facing similar situations. Sometimes knowing that even royal families struggle with loss and illness can make people feel less alone in their own difficulties. As the evening wound down and the children were taken up to bed, the adults remained in the drawing room, each lost in their own thoughts about the conversation they had just shared. They had crossed an invisible threshold, moving from private knowledge to family acceptance of an approaching loss. Kate was the first to break the contemplative silence. She's teaching them how to say goodbye with grace. That's a gift that will serve them throughout their lives. Charles nodded, understanding that his wife was creating a template for facing difficult truths that would shape his grandchildren's character for decades to come. In her illness, Camilla was demonstrating the same principles that had guided her public service: dignity, honesty, and an unwavering commitment to putting others' needs above her own comfort. The evening had changed everything and nothing. The facts of Camilla's condition remained unchanged, but the family's relationship to those facts had been transformed through honest conversation and shared commitment to supporting each other. They had learned that love could coexist with loss, that strength could emerge from vulnerability, and that even the most difficult conversations could become precious memories when approached with courage and compassion. The December morning dawned gray and cold, with frost covering the windows of the king's private chambers at Buckingham Palace. Charles stood before his mirror, adjusting his black tie with hands that trembled slightly, not from age, but from the weight of what he was about to do. Today, he would make a public statement that would end his marriage in the eyes of the law while breaking his heart in ways he could never have imagined. The past month had been a blur of medical consultations, legal meetings, and conversations that no husband should ever have to endure. Camilla's condition had deteriorated faster than anyone expected, and with it came complications that went far beyond personal loss. The constitutional lawyers had been clear. If the queen consort became incapacitated, certain protocols would need to be followed to protect both the monarchy and her personal wishes. 3 days earlier, Camilla had suffered a severe episode that left her unconscious for nearly 6 hours. When she awakened, her speech was slurred, her memory scattered, and her ability to recognize even familiar faces had become unreliable. The doctors spoke in careful medical terminology, but their meaning was unmistakable. The woman Charles had loved for decades was disappearing piece by piece, even as her body continued its struggle. "Your Majesty," his private secretary appeared in the doorway. "The Archbishop of Canterbury has arrived for your appointment." Charles nodded, straightening his shoulders in preparation for one of the most difficult conversations of his life. The Archbishop had been a trusted advisor through many royal crises, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for what Charles was about to request. They met in the king's study, the same room where Charles had signed countless state documents and made decisions that affected millions of people. Today, he would sign something that affected only him, but felt more consequential than any legislation or diplomatic treaty. "Archbishop," Charles began, his voice steady despite the chaos in his heart, "I need your counsel on a matter of both faith and law." The elderly cleric settled into his chair with the patience of someone who had learned to navigate the complex intersection of spiritual guidance and constitutional responsibility. "I am here to serve, Your Majesty, in whatever capacity you need." Charles walked to his desk and picked up a document that had been drafted by the palace's legal team, papers that would legally dissolve his marriage to Camilla while she was no longer competent to consent to or contest such action. It was a mechanism designed to protect her assets and medical decisions from constitutional complications, but it felt like the ultimate betrayal of everything they had built together. "The doctors say she may not recover her faculties," Charles said, his voice breaking slightly on the words. Her advance directives are clear about her wishes for medical care. But the legal complications of being queen consort complicate everything. If I don't act now, if something happens to her while she holds the title, the constitutional crisis could damage the monarchy itself. The archbishop studied the documents with the careful attention of someone who understood their significance. And you believe this is what she would want? She made me promise, Charles replied, remembering a conversation from weeks earlier when Camilla's mind was still clear. She said she never wanted her illness to become a burden on the institution we both served. She made me swear that if the time came, I would choose the crown over my heart. It was a promise he had made reluctantly, hoping he would never need to honor it. But Camilla had been insistent, her years of experience as a working royal having taught her that personal desires could never supersede constitutional responsibilities. She had lived through enough royal scandals to understand how quickly personal crises could become public disasters. There is precedent for such actions, the archbishop said carefully, though the circumstances have been different. The question becomes whether this serves the greater good or simply serves convenience. Charles felt anger flare at the suggestion that his decision was motivated by anything other than love and duty. Convenience? Archbishop, I am voluntarily destroying my own happiness to protect an institution that has already taken everything I hold dear. There is nothing convenient about declaring the woman I love dead to me while she still breathes. The harsh words hung in the air between them, revealing the depth of Charles's anguish. He had spent his entire life balancing personal desires against public responsibilities, but nothing had prepared him for this choice between honoring his wife's wishes and abandoning her when she needed him most. Forgive me, the archbishop said gently. I spoke without considering the personal cost of what you're contemplating. Help me understand how you arrived at this decision. Charles returned to his chair, suddenly, feeling every one of his 75 years. 3 weeks ago, Camilla called me to her bedside during one of her lucid moments. She told me that she had spoken with constitutional lawyers months earlier, when she first received her diagnosis. She had already drafted papers that would allow for this dissolution if her condition became incompatible with her royal duties. The memory of that conversation was seared into Charles's mind with painful clarity. Camilla had been weak, but determined, her voice barely above a whisper as she explained her reasoning. She had watched the monarchy navigate crises throughout her time as queen consort, and she refused to allow her illness to create new vulnerabilities for an institution already facing challenges about its relevance and future. She said that loving me meant loving what I represent, Charles continued, that she could not bear the thought of her incapacity creating constitutional questions that might weaken the crown's position. She had already consulted with legal experts about the cleanest way to handle the situation if her condition deteriorated. The archbishop leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. And what of your other family members? How do William and Catherine feel about this decision? Charles's expression darkened at the mention of his son and daughter-in-law. William is furious with me. He believes I'm abandoning Camilla when she needs me most. He says that if love means anything, it means standing by someone regardless of legal complications. It had been their worst argument in years, a heated exchange that revealed fundamental differences in how they viewed duty, love, and sacrifice. William represented a generation that believed authenticity mattered more than protocol, that the monarchy's future depended on showing genuine human emotion rather than institutional detachment. And Catherine? Kate understands the impossible position I'm in, Charles said slowly. She sees both sides, my desire to honor Camilla's wishes and the devastating personal cost of doing so. She's been remarkable, actually, continuing to visit Camilla daily, even as William grows more angry with my decision. Kate had become an unexpected source of wisdom during the crisis, her perspective shaped by her experience as both an outsider who had joined the family and a future queen who understood the weight of constitutional responsibility. She had spent hours with Camilla during her more coherent moments, helping to clarify her true wishes while providing emotional support to Charles during his darkest hours. There's something else, Charles said, reaching for another document from his desk. Kate suggested that we create a private ceremony, separate from the legal dissolution, a way to honor our marriage while acknowledging its legal end. The archbishop examined the proposed ceremony with interest. It was neither a divorce nor an annulment, but rather a spiritual recognition that love could transcend legal definitions. The service would acknowledge that while their marriage was ending in law, their commitment to each other remained intact in their hearts and in the eyes of God. This is quite unusual, the archbishop observed. Then, your entire relationship has been unusual. You faced challenges that few couples could survive, found love under circumstances that would defeat most people, and built a partnership that served both your personal happiness and your public duties. Charles nodded, grateful for the acknowledgement of what he and Camilla had created together. Their love story had never been conventional. It began in scandal and controversy, survived decades of public scrutiny, and ultimately transformed both of them into better people and more effective working royals. "I need to know that I'm not committing a sin," Charles said quietly. "That choosing duty over desire, law over love, doesn't make me a failure as a husband or a man." The Archbishop was quiet for a long moment, considering the spiritual and practical implications of Charles's situation. "Love takes many forms, Your Majesty. Sometimes it means fighting against impossible odds. Sometimes it means accepting them. The question is whether your actions serve love or abandon it." "I believe they serve it," Charles replied with conviction. Camilla spent her entire married life putting service before self-interest. She transformed herself from a private person into a public servant, endured criticism and scrutiny, worked tirelessly for causes that mattered to her. She earned her place in history through dedication and sacrifice. "I cannot honor that legacy by allowing her illness to become a constitutional crisis." The Archbishop nodded slowly. "Then, we shall proceed with both the legal dissolution and the private ceremony. But I have one condition." Charles looked up with surprise and concern. "You must also create provisions for continuing her care as if you were still married. The legal dissolution cannot become an excuse for abandoning your emotional and practical responsibilities to her." "Already arranged," Charles said immediately. Kate insisted on it. "Camilla will continue to receive royal-level medical care, security, and support. She'll remain at Clarence House with round-the-clock nursing. Legally, she'll be my dear friend and former wife. Practically, nothing will change in terms of her comfort and dignity. And you will continue to visit her every day that I'm in London," Charles promised. "She may not recognize me, she may not understand who I am, but I will not abandon her." The Archbishop stood and moved to the window, looking out over the palace grounds where tourists continued their daily pilgrimage to witness the pageantry of monarchy. "Your mother faced many difficult decisions during her reign, but none quite like this. You are writing new precedent, creating new ways for the monarchy to navigate the intersection of personal loss and public responsibility." Charles joined him at the window, both men silent as they contemplated the weight of the decision that had been made. In a few hours, Charles would sign documents that would legally end his marriage while privately recommitting himself to caring for the woman he loved. It was a solution that satisfied neither law nor emotion completely, but perhaps that was the nature of truly difficult choices. They required sacrificing perfection in service of a greater good. "One more thing," the Archbishop said as he prepared to leave. "What will you tell the public about this decision?" Charles had been dreading this question, knowing that his choice would be dissected and criticized by people who had never faced such an impossible situation. "The truth, as much as we can share, that the Queen Consort's health has deteriorated to the point where she can no longer fulfill her constitutional duties. That to protect both her dignity and the stability of the crown, we have made the difficult decision to legally dissolve our marriage while maintaining our personal commitment to her care. And if people say you've abandoned her, then they say it," Charles replied with resignation. "I cannot control how this decision is perceived, only whether it serves the people and principles I've sworn to protect." Camilla understood that, even in her illness. She knew that sometimes love requires letting go. As the Archbishop departed to make arrangements for both the legal proceedings and the private ceremony, Charles remained at the window watching the world continue its daily routines, oblivious to the personal drama unfolding within the palace walls. In a few hours, he would become a divorced man again, officially single while practically devoted to caring for a woman who might not even remember his name. The irony was devastating. In trying to honor Camilla's wishes and protect her legacy, he had to declare her dead to him in the eyes of the law. It was a choice that would define the remainder of his reign and his life, a decision that transformed love into duty and marriage into service, leaving him technically free but emotionally bound more tightly than ever before. The winter sunshine streamed through the tall windows of St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, casting rainbow patterns through the ancient stained glass onto the stone floor below. Charles stood alone at the altar where he had been crowned less than 2 years earlier, waiting for a ceremony that would formally end one chapter of his life, while opening another he had never expected to write. It had been 6 weeks since he signed the legal documents dissolving his marriage to Camilla, 6 weeks of visiting her daily at Clarence's house, where she resided in a specialized care wing that felt more like a comfortable home than a medical facility. Some days she recognized him, most days she didn't. But Kate had been right. Love didn't require recognition to remain meaningful. The chapel doors opened quietly, and William entered, his expression still troubled by his father's decision, but his presence indicating acceptance of what could not be changed. Behind him came Kate, wearing a simple navy dress that managed to look both elegant and appropriate for such a solemn occasion. In her arms, she carried Charlotte, while George and Louis walked solemnly beside her. "Papa," William said, using the childhood term that had become more frequent since Camilla's illness. "Are you ready for this?" Charles nodded, though ready seemed like an inadequate word for what he was about to do. The Archbishop had designed a service that would acknowledge the end of his marriage while celebrating what he and Camilla had built together. It was neither funeral nor divorce ceremony, but something entirely new, a ritual of release and remembrance. Kate approached the altar with natural grace, setting Charlotte down before turning to face Charles with an expression of such compassion that he felt momentarily overwhelmed by gratitude for her presence in their family. "How is she today?" Kate asked gently, referring to her daily visits to Camilla. She asked about the garden. Charles replied with a sad smile. "She couldn't remember my name, but she remembered that someone was supposed to help her plant daffodils for spring." Kate's eyes filled with tears she tried to hide from the children. She had continued her visits to Camilla even after the legal dissolution, reading to her, showing her photographs, maintaining connections that transcended legal definitions of relationship. It was Kate who had suggested this private ceremony, understanding that Charles needed a way to honor what he and Camilla had shared while accepting its end. The Archbishop of Canterbury entered with his ceremonial robes, carrying a prayer book that contained readings Charles had selected during weeks of careful consideration. The service would acknowledge that love sometimes required letting go, that commitment could survive the dissolution of legal bonds, and that grief and gratitude could coexist in the same heart. Before we begin, the Archbishop addressed the small gathering. "I want to acknowledge that what we do here today is unprecedented. We gather not to celebrate union, but to honor a love that transcended conventional boundaries and served something greater than personal happiness." Charles felt his composure waver at these words. His relationship with Camilla had indeed transcended conventional boundaries, surviving public criticism, constitutional challenges, and ultimately her devastating illness. They had built something remarkable together, transforming scandal into service and controversy into commitment. The service began with readings that Charles and Camilla had selected together during one of her last lucid moments. Passages about enduring love, about service to others, about finding meaning in suffering. Kate read from Corinthians with a voice that carried both strength and emotion, while William offered a prayer that asked for comfort for those facing impossible choices. Charles Philip Arthur George, the Archbishop, began the central portion of the ceremony. "Do you release Camilla Rosemary from her vows to you, not from lack of love, but from abundance of it?" "I do," Charles replied, his voice breaking slightly on the words. "I release her from duty, from protocol, from the burden of being queen consort, while keeping her forever in my heart." It was a moment that encapsulated everything they had learned about love during their years together, that sometimes caring for someone meant setting them free from obligations they could no longer fulfill, that dignity sometimes required difficult choices, that true partnership meant putting the other person's needs above your own comfort. The Archbishop turned to Kate, a surprise that Charles hadn't expected. "Catherine Elizabeth, will you serve as witness to this release, and as guardian of the memories that define this union?" Kate stepped forward without hesitation, her voice clear and strong. "I will. I promise to keep their story alive, to honor what they built together, and to ensure that their love serves as an example for future generations." Charles looked at his daughter-in-law with profound gratitude. Kate had understood something that escaped even his own children, that witnessing this ceremony wasn't about supporting his decision to end his marriage, but about honoring what the marriage had meant and ensuring its lessons weren't lost. Young George stepped forward unexpectedly, his 11-year-old voice cutting through the formal atmosphere with startling directness. "Grandpa, will you still love Grandpa Camilla even though you're not married anymore?" The question hung in the air, its childlike simplicity exposing the heart of what they were doing. Charles knelt to meet his grandson's eye level, his voice gentle but certain. Yes, George, I will love her until my last breath and beyond. Marriage is just one way to show love. There are many others. Like taking care of her when she's sick? Charlotte asked, her young voice reflecting the wisdom children often possessed about fundamental truths. Exactly like that, Charles confirmed, lifting her into his arms. Love means staying even when it's hard, caring even when someone can't care back the same way. Kate watched this exchange with tears flowing freely now, understanding that Charles was teaching his grandchildren about commitment in ways that would shape their character for decades to come. He was showing them that love wasn't just about happiness and celebration, but about service and sacrifice. The Archbishop concluded the ceremony with a blessing that acknowledged endings and beginnings, loss and hope. As the small group prepared to leave the chapel, Kate approached Charles with an expression that suggested she had something important to say. There's something you should know, she said quietly. During my visit yesterday, Camilla had one of her clearer moments. She asked me to give you this. Kate pulled a sealed envelope from her purse, Charles's name written in Camilla's distinctive handwriting across the front. With trembling hands, he opened the letter and read words that would stay with him for the rest of his life. My dearest Charles, if you're reading this, then you've kept your promise to me. You've chosen duty over desire, service over self-interest, exactly as a king should. Please don't carry guilt about this decision. You gave me love I never expected to find, purpose I never knew I needed, and a life of meaning beyond anything I could have imagined. Now you've given me the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that our love was strong enough to survive even this ultimate sacrifice. Be proud of what we built together. Be proud of the choice you've made. Most of all, be happy. You deserve joy, Charles. You always have. All my love, always, Camilla. Charles read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in his jacket pocket near his heart. Kate had given him something precious beyond measure. Camilla's approval for the impossible choice he had made, her understanding that true love sometimes meant letting go. How did you know to keep this? Charles asked Kate, his voice heavy with emotion. She made me promise to give it to you after the ceremony, Kate replied. She said you would need to know that she understood, that she was proud of your strength. As they walked from the chapel toward the castle's private apartments, Kate fell into step beside Charles while the children ran ahead, their energy providing a welcome contrast to the solemnity of what they had just witnessed. There's something else, Kate said hesitantly. William and I have been talking about the future, about how to help you through this transition. Charles looked at her with curiosity mixed with apprehension. We think you need support in ways that go beyond formal royal duties, Kate continued. Someone who understands both loss and service, someone who can help you navigate what comes next. Before Charles could respond, Kate did something that surprised him completely. She reached for his hand, her touch gentle but firm, offering comfort and connection in a simple gesture that conveyed more than words could express. You don't have to face this alone, she said simply. We're family, and family takes care of each other. Charles felt overwhelmed by the generosity of her offer and the warmth of her touch. Kate represented everything good about the monarchy's future, her ability to balance tradition with authenticity, duty with compassion, service with genuine human connection. She had learned from Diana's innovations and Camilla's dedication, creating her own synthesis of royal responsibility that felt both ancient and utterly modern. Thank you, Charles said, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it, for understanding what today meant, for helping me honor both endings and beginnings. As they entered the castle, William appeared with the children, his expression softened by witnessing his father's grief and Kate's compassionate response to it. The argument between father and son wasn't fully resolved, but love had created space for understanding, for acceptance of choices that couldn't be undone. Papa, William said, using the childhood term that had become more frequent during their family crisis. Kate's right. You shouldn't face this alone. Charles looked around at the people surrounding him, his son and daughter-in-law, his grandchildren, the remnants of a family that had learned to find strength in honesty and connection in adversity. They had all been changed by Camilla's illness and his response to it, but perhaps they had also been strengthened. Outside, the winter afternoon was beginning to fade into evening, casting long shadows across the castle grounds. Somewhere in London, Camilla rested in peaceful comfort, surrounded by care and dignity even if she could no longer recognize the love that had created that sanctuary. Charles had declared her dead to him in legal terms while committing himself to keeping her memory and their love alive through his remaining years. Kate's hand in his during those final moments of the ceremony had offered more than comfort. It had offered hope. Hope that love could take many forms, that family bonds could transcend legal definitions, that support could come from unexpected sources when it was most needed. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and challenging, but no longer faced alone. Charles had made the hardest choice of his life, honoring his wife's wishes while breaking his own heart. But he had also discovered something unexpected, that sometimes in letting go of what we love most, we learn what it truly means to love without conditions, without expectations, without the possibility of return. In the end, perhaps that was the deepest lesson of kingship. That true strength came not from holding on to power or position or even love, but from knowing when to release them in service of something greater than personal happiness. Camilla had taught him that lesson in life. And now, even in her absence, she continued to teach him how to live with both grief and grace, loss and hope, solitude and the unexpected comfort of a daughter-in-law's understanding touch.